Jennifer was a smart girl from childhood. From the first day of school, she was the best student. Her parents were happy. They, simple farmers, had a daughter who was an excellent student. Most of all, Jennifer liked physics, chemistry, and biology. Many people thought that after school she would go to medical school, but she surprised everyone. She went to the University of Technology. Although her relatives actually were not particularly surprised, they all still remembered and laughed about how Jennifer was interested in all sorts of devices, even before school. Once she took apart her father's old tape recorder. She was interested in how it worked. Later, Jennifer watched attentively as her father fixed the motorcycle and repaired the sockets in the house. "Why weren't you born a boy?" smiled her father. "Why don't you go play with dolls?" But Jennifer stubbornly shook her head and went to assemble robots, cars, planes out of Lego. And at the age of 10, Jennifer had taught her neighbour, Mr. Davis, how to stop drinking. The man was already retired and was a heavy drinker. Sometimes he would get drunk and go on a rampage in the whole village. And then, one such evening, when Mr. Davis's weeping wife was cursing helplessly at her good-for-nothing husband, the girl quietly went out into the street and headed for a neighbour's house. Nobody even noticed her leaving, except her mother, who saw her daughter doing something on the neighbour's porch. After that, the girl hid behind the house, and after about 5 minutes, Mr. Davis showed up. The man stepped on the threshold and froze. He heard a sound similar to an automatic rifle. The old man got scared, sobered up right away, fell on the ground, covered his head with his hands. Then he crawled back inside the house. The next times it was all repeated. When he was sober, everything was all right. As soon as he got drunk, he started to hear an automatic shot. The old man was afraid to go crazy, and so he began to drink less often, and soon he stopped at all. Everybody in the village praised him, and Jennifer's parents laughed. The girl invented a new way to get rid of alcohol addiction. In fact, she had put the speaker right under the porch, and every time the man came home drunk, she turned on the tape. That's the secret. Simple, but it worked. And at 14, Jennifer came up with a new thing. Someone was stealing pears and apples from their garden at night. Her father even spent the night in the field, hoping to catch the thieves, all in vain. And then Jennifer thought of a way to catch the thief. In the evening, she sprayed the bushes and trees with a special paint that cannot be washed off. The girl hoped that if the thief still comes into their garden, then later he can be found by coloured hands. And so it happened. The father discovered that once again the pears were missing from several trees. He decided to walk around the village to listen to what people were saying, and soon he found out who was robbing his garden at night. He would never have thought that the school bus driver had been doing that. Jennifer's father saw the woman hanging up her wet t-shirt and swearing. "How can I get this paint out?" heard Jennifer's father. He came closer and saw that the t-shirt had burgundy stains all over it. His daughter had sprinkled the same colour on the trees. "And where did your husband get so dirty?" he asked over the fence to the woman, who shuddered and changed her face. "He was fixing the car, so it got all over him," she mumbled. And at this moment her husband came out of the house and immediately put his hands in his pockets. But there was paint, even on his elbows. "I see now who's been stealing my fruit." Jennifer's father nodded sullenly. "Tell me, what do you lack? If some alcoholic had done it, I would understand, but you have a good life." "I won't do it again," said the thief. "Just don't tell the police." No one was stealing fruit at night any more. "You know how to think out of the box, Jennifer," laughed her parents. When Jennifer was in 9th grade, trouble happened to her father. He injured his right arm in the wood by the saw. The doctors had to amputate the hand. The man was worried how he would live and work. Soon he was given a prosthesis, but it was very uncomfortable. "Don't worry, Daddy," Jennifer reassured him. "Nowadays they make such cool prostheses. They call them bionic ones. They have special electronics built in. A person with such a prosthesis can do everything as if with a normal hand." "Daughter, I've heard of them," nodded her father, "but they're very expensive." "When I grow up and go to university, I'll invent a cheaper model," declared Jennifer in an unapologetic tone. And indeed, she entered the university, where students were engaged in the study and development of various devices, including those for the rehabilitation of people with disabilities. Jennifer studied with pleasure and enthusiasm. She wanted to know everything. Soon, she and the other students began to take additional classes in the laboratory. Jennifer began to work on the artificial smart hand. She searched for ways to make it both cheaper and more functional. There was one disadvantage. This laboratory was located at the other end of the city, away from the dormitory where Jennifer lived. Twice a week after classes, Jennifer would drive there and stay up late, barely catching the last bus. That evening, she and the other students were too enthusiastic about their work. When Jennifer realized that she was going to miss the bus, she quickly said goodbye to the guys and headed for the exit. "Jennifer, where did you put the hand?" the guys shouted after her cheerfully, when they saw that she had put the prosthetic hand in her bag. "I promised to tell about my work tomorrow at the university," Jennifer explained, "and the professor said I could take it with me." "Yes, yes," replied the professor, looking away from another paper. "Take it, Jennifer, but be careful with it." "Yeah, be careful," laughed the students. "Don't scare anybody on the way." "I'll try," smiled Jennifer, and ran for the bus. But she didn't catch it in time. The last bus closed its doors and took off abruptly when the girl had just run up to the bus stop. "Stop! Stop!" shouted Jennifer with despair. But the driver was unkind that day. He saw that the girl was running as fast as she could, but he didn't stop anyway. Jennifer looked at the disappearing lights of the bus and cried. What should she do now? As luck would have it, her phone was out of charge. There was some change in her pocket, but no one would take her to another part of the city for that money. Jennifer sat down on the bench at the bus stop, pulled on a mask so that no one could see her tears. Would she really have to spend the night here? Maybe go back to the lab, she thought. Yeah, that would probably be best. Eventually she could borrow money from the guys and then give it back. Jennifer sighed in relief. But just as she was about to get up from the bench, a cab pulled up next to her. "Hi," the driver asked cheerfully. "Did you miss the last bus? Let me give you a ride." "Thank you, but I don't have any money," replied Jennifer. "So I'll give you a ride without money." The driver, a young man, smiled friendly. "Are you a student? I used to be one too. I know that sometimes money is tight. Get in. Don't be afraid. I'm going that way." And Jennifer, who had been told since childhood not to get into cars with strangers, agreed. She must have been confused, and the man seemed decent. The driver opened the door in the front, seeing that Jennifer headed back. "Don't be afraid. I'm normal. I'm not a maniac. And you can take your mask off if you'd like." "And I'm not afraid. I'm more comfortable with a mask," replied Jennifer, although deep in her heart she began to worry. The cab driver confidently drove the car. The music was playing in the car, and Jennifer carefully watched the road. It seemed like he was driving right. And suddenly, not reaching a couple of kilometers to the dormitory, the driver turned into a blind alley. "Well, come on, pay up, and then I'll take you to the door," he said, and turned off the engine. The locks on the doors clicked. "You said free of charge?" confused Jennifer. "Why, you are like a little girl. Without money doesn't mean free," grinned the driver. "Well, go ahead, get me happy." And he reached for his fly. Jennifer huddled in her chair in horror. What trouble she was in! And then common sense told her, "Jennifer, don't panic. There is a way out of every situation." Her gaze fell on the package she was clutching to her. "Well, what are you waiting for, baby?" the driver asked. And suddenly Jennifer remembered how she had cured Mr. Davis of alcoholism. "1 minute," she answered quietly. "Just close your eyes. I'm embarrassed." "Well, okay," grinned the driver and closed his eyes. What's he got to be afraid of? Jennifer, meanwhile, quietly pulled out her prosthesis and squeezed it tightly in her hand. "What are you waiting for?" asked the driver again. "I'm already starting," replied Jennifer in a trembling voice, and reached for the cab driver with her prosthetic hand. The cab driver laughed and squeezed his eyes shut in anticipation, and the next second he shuddered and opened his eyes in horror. He felt that something solid, cold, had touched his body. He looked down and saw something that looked like a hand, but it was bony, as if a skeleton had touched him. The cab driver turned his gaze to Jennifer's face and froze with fear. The mask slid down. She opened her mouth slightly. "Go away! Go away!" The driver literally shrieked and jumped out of the car. Jennifer watched in slight bewilderment as he ran away. Of course, she had counted on such a scenario, but she did not expect that it would be such a dramatic effect. She didn't hesitate and jumped out of the car too. She knew that the dormitory was just around the corner. Jennifer ran through the dark streets, clutching her prosthesis, and could still not understand why rare passerby looked at her strangely, and one woman gasped and crossed herself. The roommate was already asleep when Jennifer finally came into the room. "Jennifer, why are you so late?" grumbled Shelley. "I decided to go to bed early. Don't turn on the light." "Okay," whispered Jennifer. "Oh, what's that in your teeth?" cried Shelley, seeing that Jennifer's teeth were glowing in the dark. And only then Jennifer realized what had made such an effect on the cab driver and on passers-by. The fact was that in the lab, she and the other students fooled around a bit. On one of the websites, Jennifer bought special plates that if you put them in your mouth, they glow in the dark. Later, Jennifer got so caught up in her work that she forgot to take them off. Then the girl was upset about being late for the bus, that she did not even feel there was something on her gums. Realizing what the matter was, Jennifer told her friend about her evening adventures. Girls could not sleep half the night in the room and did not give the neighbours because of laughter. I guess he'll be telling his friends now that he saw a monster or his own death. And the girls burst into laughter again. Jennifer was smiling, even though, to be honest, she was terrified at first. But she could not imagine how frightened the driver who decided to relax a little that night with a silly, as he thought, passenger. Harvey worked in a cab for several years, but he had one weakness. He cheated on his wife. And at that stop, it was often possible to meet female students who had been late for the last bus. No, he didn't force anyone to do anything. Most of the time, they agreed almost immediately to his terms, although if they started arguing, he would just open the doors, and that was it. This time, everything seemed to be going fine, and then suddenly he opened his eyes, and in front of his face, something was like death, and her bony hand was touching him. Harvey ran away, but then he remembered that he had abandoned the car with the documents and the cash and ran back. It must have been a setup. They stole my car, most likely, he thought. He had already forgotten what he wanted to do some minutes before and considered himself a victim. But the car was still there, and even the money in the glove compartment was still intact. Was it really all a dream? Harvey wondered. But from that night on, strange changes began to happen to him. First, he stopped looking at other women. Soon he realized that driving a taxi was not his thing. He was shaking with fear when he had to drive lonely young girls because he immediately remembered the passenger with the green mouth. Harvey quit his job as a cab driver and got a job as a security guard. And one day he saw those same glowing teeth on the internet. He realized he was fooled by the girl. But he did not return to the cab. It was somehow safer to work as a security guard. And thanks to this case, his wife became finally the one and only for him. Several months passed. Jennifer was no longer late for the bus. By the end of the year, together with her teacher, they had managed to come up with a simple but fairly effective model of a bionic prosthesis. Jennifer really hoped that one day her father would be able to try on such a clever arm. About a year later, a company was interested in the invention and allocated money, and the experimental sample was presented to Jennifer's father. "What a dreadful thing! Such a hand is only for scaring thieves," said her father. "You can do a lot with such a hand." Jennifer smiled slyly. She did not tell her parents about her adventure, but that story had taught her a lot. Now she never gets into a car with a stranger, but just in case, she always has pepper spray with her. It's more reliable, because not all drivers are as impressionable as Harvey.